Welcome to Cafe Tales. I'm Ailey, your host for today's mystery. In this Halloween special, we join Poirot and Hastings on the moors of Somerset, where superstition walks hand in hand with murder. If you enjoy this story, please give this video a like and share it with fellow mystery lovers. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, do you like these? Now, as always, grab a coffee, stay curious, and let's get started. The Feast of the Skinless. Chapter 1. The Legend Awakens. I have faced German artillery at the Somme. I have stared down armed criminals in dark alleyways. Yet nothing in my experience prepared me for the thing I witnessed in the fog-choked moors of Somerset during that uncanny October of 1928. Even now, with Poirot's explanation resting in my mind like a mathematical proof, I wake some nights convinced I hear wet footsteps outside my window. It began with a letter that arrived on the 15th of October. Poirot slit the envelope with his paper knife that gray morning, his green eyes scanning the contents with the precision of a jeweler examining a questionable stone. His magnificent mustache, freshly waxed, naturally twitched once, twice, 3 times. Whatever Dr. Marcus Bellamy had written, it disturbed even Poirot's legendary composure. Mon ami, pack your warmest clothing. We journey to Somerset within the hour. Somerset? What's the urgency? A man has died under circumstances that terrify an entire village. He passed me the letter. Dr. Bellamy believes the death was murder disguised as supernatural vengeance. But the villagers, they believe otherwise. They believe in the Skinless. The letter came from Dr. Marcus Bellamy, a physician and amateur folklorist who'd spent 3 years documenting the superstitions of Ashford Hollow. His usually neat script showed signs of agitation, ink blots, crossed-out words, sentences that trailed into legibility. He described a legend that had terrorized the village for generations, the Feast of the Skinless. Every 7 years on Halloween night, a flayed corpse walked the moors, seeking living flesh to wear. The creature left behind victims whose skin bore the marks of its touch, faces frozen in expressions that suggested they had witnessed something beyond human comprehension. This year marked the 7th cycle, and 5 days ago, on the night of October 10th, the wealthy collector Lionel Garwood had been found dead in his locked study, his face contorted in such terror that the local constable refused to write a detailed report. Strange symbols had been carved into the floorboards beneath his body. Marks on his skin suggested something had traced the outline of where flesh might be removed. Dr. Bellamy wishes Poirot to arrive before Halloween. Poirot folded the letter with geometric precision. He fears more deaths will follow. The village descends into panic. People lock themselves indoors after sunset. 3 families have already fled to relatives in Bristol. You don't actually believe in this. Creature. Poirot believes in human wickedness, masquerading as supernatural. Terror. His green eyes met mine with unusual intensity. But the method of creating such terror, Hastings, that shall prove most instructive. Someone has constructed an elaborate illusion. And illusions, they always contain flaws. The little gray cells, they will find these flaws. We departed London that afternoon on the 3 train to Taunton, where Dr. Bellamy had arranged to meet us. The journey took us through countryside painted in autumn's dying colors, rust and amber, and the brown of old blood. As we traveled west, the landscape grew wilder, the hills steeper, the valleys deeper. Fog began to gather in the hollows like something that had always been there, waiting. Bellamy met us at the station as the sun touched the horizon. He was a tall, angular man in his late 40s, with the intelligent face of a skeptic, and the haunted eyes of someone whose skepticism had been tested. His handshake was firm, but his palm was damp with sweat. "Thank God you've come, Monsieur Poirot." The situation worsens daily. This morning, Thomas Wicks, one of our farmers, suffered astroke after claiming he saw the creature near the standing stones. And last night, Annie Fletcher, a housemaid, witnessed something at the well behind my house. She hasn't spoken a coherent word since. She saw this Skinless? She saw something. He described it as a figure without skin, muscle and sinew gleaming in moonlight, eyes that never blinked because they had no lids. Bellamy gestured toward his motor car. I've taken her into my household for observation. The girl is half Romani on her grandmother's side. The villagers claim that makes her more susceptible to the curse. We drove through Ashford Hollow as darkness claimed the moors. The village huddled in a valley between steep hills, its stone cottages pressing together as though seeking protection. Carved turnip satin windows, crude faces meant to ward off evil. Every door bore a mark in white paint, symbols that Bellamy explained were meant to deny entrance to the walking dead. Superstition, Poirot murmured, yet superstition that serves someone's purpose. Tell me, Doctor, who benefits from this fear? That's what I hoped you would discover. Bellamy's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Garwood's nephew Gregory inherits a considerable fortune. Clara Winthrop, Garwood's former fiancée, has reason to hate him. Had destroyed her reputation years ago. And Zara Pechelenko, the Romani woman who lives on the moor, is descended from Whodunit, who was burned alive by a mob in 1878. Garwood's great-grandfather helped build that pyre. The motor car climbed toward Bellamy's house, a solid Georgian structure on the village outskirts. Through the gathering fog, I glimpsed the standing stones on the moor beyond, ancient markers that seemed to watch our approach with the patience of things that had witnessed centuries of human folly. Bellamy stopped the car before his door. The house stood dark except for a single lamp burning in an upper window. Behind that window, a silhouette moved, a woman's shape pacing back and forth with the restless energy of a caged animal. Annie Fletcher, Bellamy said. She hasn't left that room since the incident. My housekeeper, Mrs. Barrow, brings her food, but the girl barely eats. Just sits and watches the moors, waiting for it to return. Poirot stepped from the motor car and stood perfectly still. His egg-shaped head tilted as though listening to something beyond normal hearing. The fog pressed closer, muffling sound and distorting distance. In that oppressive silence, I heard what might have been footsteps, wet, heavy, moving through the mist with purposeful stride. Then the sound stopped. The fog swirled, and from somewhere in the darkness came a sound I shall never forget. A rasping breath that held no trace of humanity, followed by words in a language I didn't recognize. Harsh syllables that seemed to carry the weight of ancient rage. Poirot's hand gripped my arm with surprising strength. His face had gone pale, but his eyes blazed with the fierce concentration of a mind that had just glimpsed the edge of a particularly complex puzzle. Voila, he whispered. The performance, she has begun. And Poirot, he shall be a most attentive audience. The front door opened, spilling yellow lamplight across the gravel. Mrs. Enid Barrow stood in the doorway, a severe woman in black, whose gray hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into a mask. Her pale hands twisted together as though washing themselves of invisible stains, and her eyes held something I couldn't quite identify. Fear, certainly, but beneath the fear lay something else, something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Chapter 2. The House of Secrets. Mrs. Barrow stepped aside to let us enter, her movement stiff and formal. The house smelled of beeswax and something else, a medicinal odor that reminded me of hospital corridors. The hallways stretched before us, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow our progress. Electric lights cast harsh shadows that made the familiar grotesque. I've prepared rooms for you both. Her voice carried the flat tone of someone reciting memorized words. Mr. Gregory Garwood and Miss Winthrop arrived this afternoon. They're in the library examining Mr. Lionel's papers. They've been most insistent about seeing the body, but Dr. Bellamy keeps it at the surgery. Wise precaution. Poirot removed his hat and coat with meticulous care, handing them to Mrs. Barrow as though she were a coat rack rather than a person. And the girl, Annie Fletcher, she remains in her room. Won't come out, won't speak except to mutter in that heathen tongue. Mrs. Barrow's fingers resumed their restless washing motion. I bring her meals. She doesn't eat. Just sits by the window watching, waiting for it to come back. You believe her story? The housekeeper's pale eyes fixed on Poirot with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I believe evil walks when good folk invite it. My great-grandfather helped purge this village of wickedness in 1878, burned the witch Whodunit on the green. We had peace for years after that. But evil has a way of returning, Monsieur Poirot. It comes back for those whore-member, those who carry the blood guilt. Poirot's green eyes narrowed. You speak of guilt as though it were hereditary. Sin passes through generations like disease. She turned toward the stairs. Your rooms are ready. Dinner is at 8. Best to be indoors when darkness comes full. The Skinless walks at night, and it knows the faces of those it seeks. She climbed the stairs without looking back, her black dress disappearing into the shadows above like smoke drawn up a chimney. Bellamy led us to his study, where a fire burned in the grate, offering inadequate warmth against the creeping cold that seemed to seep through the very walls. A map of the village dominated one wall, marked with symbols in red ink, standing stones, ancient wells, burial grounds. A circle encompassed the entire village, with Garwood's house at its exact center. The boundaries where the dead may walk during Samhain, according to local tradition. Bellamy poured brandy with hands that trembled slightly. Garwood's estate sits within the ritual circle. My house lies just outside it. Yet Annie saw the creature here, at my well. The boundaries, it seems, no longer hold. Or perhaps they never existed. Poirot accepted the brandy but didn't drink. Tell me of Lionel Garwood. What manner of man dies of terror in a locked room? A man who spent his life collecting darkness. Bellamy's jaw tightened. Garwood owned the finest collection of occult manuscripts in England, books that document rituals best left forgotten. 3 weeks ago, he purchased something from Zara Petalenko, a mirror prepared with ash from Whodunit's bones, claimed it would let him see the Skinless before it could claim him. And did it? He looked into it at midnight on the new moon, October 8th. When his manservant found him the next morning, the mirror was smashed. Garwood's hands cut on the shards and his face. Bellamy drank deeply. I've seen death in many forms. Never have I seen such terror frozen in human features. Whatever he saw in that mirror stopped his heart. Where are these mirror pieces now? Zara collected them. Said they were dangerous, that Garwood's blood mixed with. Whodunit's ash created a doorway. Every reflection becomes a portal through which the Skinless can observe its chosen victims. A knock interrupted us. The door opened to reveal a young man in his late 20s, handsome in a weak way, with the entitled bearing of someone who had never faced genuine hardship. High's expensive suit bore mudstains that suggested careless travel. His eyes held the particular brightness of barely controlled fear. You're Gregory Garwood. My uncle is dead, and Bellamy refuses to let me see the body or access the estate. I have rights. Lionel had no other family. His collection, his fortune, everything passes to me. How convenient for you that he died. Poirot set down his brandy with deliberate precision. Convenient? Gregory's voice rose. I was in Bath when he died, 30 miles away, with witnesses. Clara telephoned me the morning after. I came immediately. Miss Winthrop summoned you? She said the villagers wanted to burn Lionel's house, destroy his books, scatter his collection. They think he summoned the thing that killed him. Gregory's hands clenched into fists. But I know the truth. Clara killed him. She's hated him for 20 years, ever since he discovered her Romani blood and ended their engagement. She has motive. She's knowledge of her people's cursed rituals. and she was in the village the night he died. Strong accusations. Poirot's mustache quivered with interest. You have evidence? I have logic. Who else would want him dead? Not me. I inherit whether he dies now or in 20 years. Not some phantom from folklore. Clara Winthrop murdered my uncle, and she's using this superstition to cover her crime. The door swung wider. A woman stood in the hallway, her gray hair pinned in an elaborate style decades out of fashion. She wore a traveling dress of dark green wool, and her face bore the kind of beauty that age refines rather than diminishes. But her eyes held the cold fury of someone who's nursed hatred until it became sustenance. How dare you? Clara Winthrop's voice cut like a surgeon's blade. Your uncle destroyed my life with lies, called me a witch, a seductress who used dark magic to ensnare him. The truth? He learned my grandmother was half Romani and cast me aside like refuse. But I didn't kill him, Gregory. I wanted him to live, to suffer as I've suffered, to die slowly of loneliness and regret. She stepped into the room, bringing with her the scent of lavender and something sharper, a medicinal smell that matched the odor permeating the house. But if someone did kill him, I hope they made him suffer. I hope he died screaming, knowing that his hatred had brought about his own destruction. She smiled, showing teeth. And I hope whatever killed him isn't finished. I hope it takes everyone who carries the blood of those murderers, everyone who descended from the mob that burned an innocent woman alive. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Her left hand rested on the frame, and I saw what she'd been concealing. 3 parallel marks on her wrist. Darkest bruises. Running in perfect lines beneath her sleeve. It's already begun, she whispered. The choosing. I felt its touch 2 weeks ago. Cold fingers tracing where skin meets bone. Tonight is October 15th. Halloween comes in 16 days, and by then the 7 will be complete. She vanished into the hallway, leaving only the echo of her footsteps and the sick certainty that we'd just heard something terribly important. Poirot rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded moors. His reflection in the glass showed an expression I'd rarely seen, the look of a man who had just realized the game was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. 16 days, he murmured, and 7 victims chosen. The mathematics, Hastings, they're most precise. Someone has planned this with remarkable care. Someone who understands that the best murders are those the victims commit upon themselves through their own fear. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like something alive and hungry. And somewhere in that gray nothingness, I heard it again, wet footsteps moving with purpose through the darkness, moving toward the house. Chapter 3. The Marked Ones. Dinner was a tense affair. Mrs. Barrow served cold meat and bread in the dining room, where portraits of Bellamy's ancestors stared down with the stern disapproval of Puritan judges. Clara sat at one end of the table, Gregory at the other, each refusing to acknowledge the other's existence. Annie Fletcher did not join us. Mrs. Barrow reported the girl still refused to leave her room. She must eat something. Bellamy pushed food around his plate without appetite. I'll have Mrs. Barrow prepare a tray. The girl eats what she wishes. The housekeeper's voice came from the doorway, flat and final. Some have no appetite when death approaches. Better to make peace with God than stuff one's belly? That's hardly helpful. Gregory's fork clattered against his plate. The girl is terrified, not dying. Are you certain? Mrs. Barrow's pale eyes fixed on him. Thomas Wicks was terrified 5 days ago. He suffered his stroke the next morning. Fear kills as surely as any blade, Mr. Garwood. Your uncle learned that lesson in his locked study. She vanished into the kitchen before anyone could respond, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence that Gregory finally broke with forced joviality. Well, this is cheerful. Nothing like a bit of supernatural dread to season one's dinner. He drained his wineglass. Bellamy, you can't seriously believe any of this nonsense. The skinless curses, ancient rituals. It's medieval thinking. Medieval thinking that has killed at least one man. Poirot had barely touched his food, his eyes moving between the diners with the focus of a naturalist observing specimens, and the marked others. Miss Winthrop, you showed us your wrist. You claim the marks appeared 2 weeks ago. Clara's hand moved instinctively to cover her sleeve. I woke one morning and found them. 3 lines perfectly parallel as though drawn with a ruler. They don't hurt, but they won't fade. I've tried every remedy. Show me. Poirot's tone left no room for refusal. Clara hesitated, then rolled back her sleeve. The marks were exactly as she'd described, 3 parallel lines, each about 2 inches long, running across the inner wrist. The skin around them showed no inflammation, no scarring, just dark lines that looked less like wounds and more like stains that had soaked through from beneath the skin. Remarkable. Poirot examined them without touching. The spacing, it is precise, 2 inches exactly between each line. And you felt nothing when they appeared? I dreamed something touched me, cold fingers counting my pulse. When I woke, the marks were there. I have them too. Gregory's voice had lost its bravado. He pushed back his own sleeve to reveal identical marks on his right wrist. Appeared 3 days ago. I thought I'd scratched myself, but they keep getting darker. The chosen ones. Mrs. Barrow had returned with coffee, her voice carrying an ugly satisfaction. The skinless marks its victims before the feast. 7 souls, 7 marks. Your great-grandfather helped build Vodoma's pyre, Mr. Gregory. Your great-great-aunt brought the kindling, Miss Winthrop. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children. That's enough. Bellamy's voice cracked like a whip. You forget yourself, Mrs. Barrow. These are guests in my home. Are they? The housekeeper's smile showed too many teeth. Or are they the condemned, gathering in the only house that still offers shelter? My great-grandfather did God's work in 1878. I'm proud of his service. But pride doesn't protect against ancient evil, Doctor. The skinless doesn't care about right or wrong. It only feeds. She set down the coffee pot with deliberate care and left the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall like a countdown of doom. She's mad. Gregory's hand shook as he poured coffee. Bellamy, your housekeeper is clearly disturbed. You can't keep her on. Mrs. Barrow has served my family for 30 years. But Bellamy's voice lacked conviction. She's always been intense about the old stories. Since Garwood's death, she's become more so. But mad? No, simply frightened, like everyone else. I should like to speak with Annie Fletcher. Poirot rose from the table. The girl witnessed this creature. Her testimony will prove most instructive. She won't see anyone, Bellamy began. A scream tore through the house, high and sustained, coming from the upper floor. It cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, choking sound that raised every hair on my neck. We raced for the stairs, Poirot's short legs pumping with surprising speed. The hallway above stretched dark except for a single lamp outside Annie's room. The door stood open, swinging gently on its hinges. Inside, the room had been transformed into a nightmare. Symbols covered every surface, the same Romani death hexes I'd seen in Bellamy's research materials, painted in something dark and viscous that might have been blood. The wallpaper hung in strips, torn with what looked like claw marks. The mattress had been shredded, feathers drifting through the air like snow. Annie Fletcher sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, her arms wrapped around her knees. When she saw us, her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her eyes had gone wide and glassy, fixed on something beyond our perception. Then she spoke, not in English, but in a harsh, guttural language that seemed to scrape against the air itself. The words meant nothing to me, But Clara Winthrop gasped and stumbled backward, her face draining of color. What is she saying? Bellamy gripped Clara's arm. You understand Romani? Those aren't Romani words. That's the death tongue, the language used only in the darkest rituals. Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. She's reciting the names, the 7 who will be taken. Lionel Garwood, first to fall. Bernard Finch, who disturbs the grave. Gregory Garwood, who inherits sin. Clara Winthrop, who carries cursed blood. Annie Fletcher, who witnessed and must pay. Marcus Bellamy, who seeks what should stay hidden. Annie's voice rose to a shriek on the final name, then cut off completely. She slumped forward, unconscious. 6 names. Poirot's voice cut through our shock with the precision of a scalpel. She spoke 6 names, but the legend requires 7 victims. Who is the 7th? I am. Mrs. Barrow stood in the doorway, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. She held out her wrists, showing marks identical to those on Clara and Gregory. I've been marked since the night Garwoodied. I felt it touch me in the darkness, cold fingers counting my blood. We're all chosen now, all connected by ancestral sin. And in 16 days, the Skinless will feast. She turned and walked away, leaving us in that destroyed room with an unconscious girl and the growing certainty that we were caught in something far more complex than a simple murder. Poirot knelt beside Annie, checking her pulse with practiced efficiency. His face had gone thoughtful, those little gray cells engaging with the puzzle in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Most interesting, he murmured. She speaks the names of victims, but one name troubles Poirot greatly. Bernard Finch. Who is this person? The librarian. Bellamy's voice shook. Bernard Finch maintains the village library. A quiet man, stammers when nervous. He's been researching the legend for months, helping me document the folklore. Why would he be marked? He has no connection to the mob that burned Whodunit. Then perhaps, Poirot said, rising to his feet, someone wishes him to have a connection. Or perhaps he has already disturbed something that should have remained buried. Either way, we must find this Bernard Finch, and we must find him before whoever orchestrates this elaborate charade decides to make him the second victim. Outside Annie's window, fog pressed against the glass like something trying to force its way inside. And in that gray nothingness, I saw a shadow move, tall, impossibly thin, with a shape that suggested human form, but lacked something essential. The shadow paused as though aware of my gaze. Then it raised one hand and pressed it against the glass from the outside, 3 fingers perfectly spaced, leaving marks that began to frost the window in a pattern I'd seen twice before that evening. The marks of the chosen. Chapter 4. The Librarian's Secret. We found Bernard. Finch the next morning, though found suggests a deliberate search. In truth, he came to us stumbling through Bellamy's front door at dawn, his clothes soaked with dew and grave dirt, his wire-rimmed spectacles sitting askew on his pale face. Dr. Bellamy. His stammer made every word an effort. I need help. Please, you must help me. Bellamy caught him, Ash's knees buckled, guiding him to a chair in the morning room. I poured brandy while Poirot observed with that peculiar intensity he reserved for moments of crucial discovery. The librarian's hands shook so violently he could barely hold the glass. What happened? Bellamy checked his pulse, his physician's instincts overriding everything else. Bernard, where have you been? You're freezing. The church cemetery. I went there last night. Had to see if the book was real. His eyes darted between us, wide with fear that bordered on madness. The old legend speaks of a text buried with the standing stones, the ritual of unbinding. I thought if I could find it, prove it was just paper and ink, the village would stop this panic. But when I dug into the grave, he trailed off, staring at his hands. In the morning light, I could see marks on his palms, dark stains that looked like bruises, running in 3 parallel lines across each palm. The marks. Poirot moved closer. When did they appear? When I touched the book, the moment my fingers brushed the cover, I felt something, cold, like ice burning through skin. I dropped it, but too late. The marks were already there. He held out his hands, palms up, in a gesture of supplication, and I heard a voice in my head speaking the old Tati tongue. It said my name, said I was chosen, the third to fall. You brought this book? Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Bernard reached into his coat with trembling fingers and produced a leather-bound volume. Its cover stained black with grave dirt and something else, dark smears that might have been old blood. The pages were vellum, covered in script I couldn't read, but the illustrations needed no translation. Figures without skin, anatomical drawings showing how flesh separated from muscle. Ritual instructions accompanied by diagrams of standing stones and sacrificial circles. Don't touch it. Bernard pulled it back as Bellamy reached for it. Whatever this is, it's not just a book. I've cataloged thousands of volumes. This one feels different, wrong, like it's aware of being read. A new voice spoke from the doorway. The ritual of unbinding. I thought it burned with my great-grandmother. Zara Petulenko stood there, wrapped in a traveling cloak still damp with morning fog. She was perhaps 50, her copper-dark skin lined with age, but her black eyes bright with an intelligence that missed nothing. Gold coins hung from her ears, and her filed teeth showed as she smiled, a predator's expression that held no warmth. How did you get in? Bellamy rose, positioning himself between her and Bernard. Your housekeeper let me in. Said you'd need someone who understands the old ways. Zara moved to Bernard, ignoring Bellamy's protective stance. She studied the marks on the librarian's palms without touching them. The choosing mark. 3 lines for the 3 layers of skin that will be taken. Epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous tissue. The Skinless doesn't just kill, Mr. Finch. It studies, learns, prepares its victims for the harvest. That's enough. Bellamy's voice shook with anger. You're terrifying a man who needs medical attention, not folklore. I'm telling him the truth. Zara's eyes never left Bernard's face. You found the book, but did you read it? The first pages before I dropped it. It doesn't create the curse. It documents something already here, something that existed before the Romana came to these moors. Something ancient that Michael made a bargain with in 1878. Bernard's voice dropped to a whisper. He wanted his granddaughter Whodunit burned alive for being different. He found this thing in the stones and offered it 7 skins every 7 years in exchange for 1 night wearing her face. And the creature agreed. Zara's smile vanished, but it lied. Took Whodunit's skin for 1 night, then refused to give it back. Kept her consciousness trapped inside itself, screaming. Mikhail's been trying to bargain it back ever since, offering more skins, more victims, but the creature just feeds and feeds and feeds. This is insanity. Gregory appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep. Ghost stories and curses. We're educated people. We should be investigating real suspects, not listening to a gypsy's fairy tales. You're marked. Zara pointed at Gregory's wrist. You felt its touch. You know it's real. I know someone is playing games. But Gregory's hand moved instinctively to cover his marks. Someone with knowledge of chemistry and theatrics. Someone who wants us frightened. Then explain this. Bernard stood on shaking legs and turned his hands palm up again. As we watched, the marks began to spread. Thin lines like cracks in porcelain branching out from the original 3, spreading across his palms and up his wrists. Not blood, not bruises, something else. The skin itself was changing, separating along invisible seams. What's happening to me? Bernard's voice rose in panic. Make it stop! Please, make it stop! He screamed. The sound tore from his throat with primal terror as the skin on his palms began to lift. Not tearing, but separating cleanly like paper peeling from a wall. Clear fluid wept from the exposed tissue beneath, and I could see the raw muscle, red and glistening. Bellamy grabbed his medical bag, pulling out bandages and antiseptic, but Bernard stumbled backward, clawing at his own hands as though he could stop the process through force of will. The skin continued to peel, strips of epidermis hanging loose, revealing the architecture of flesh beneath. The choosing has become the taking. Zara's voice cut through Bernard's screams with terrible finality. It's accelerated, changed. 16 days was a lie. The feast begins tonight. Bernard collapsed, his screams giving way to sobbing. Bellamy wrapped his hands in bandages, but we could all see the truth. The damage was precise, surgical, impossible. No natural process could do this. No chemical burn would create such clean separation. Poirot knelt beside the librarian, his face carved from stone. Only his eyes moved, studying the wounds with the intensity of a man witnessing something that shouldn't exist. None. His voice came out barely above a whisper. This is not supernatural. It cannot be. There must be an explanation. There must be. A crash from upstairs silenced him, glass shattering, wood splintering. Then Clara Winthrop's voice roared with terror. It's in the mirrors! God help us, it's in all the mirrors. We raced for the stairs, leaving Bernard in Bellamy's care. The upper hallway stretched before us, and I saw what Clara had seen. Every mirror, every reflective surface, every window showed the same impossible image. A figure stood behind us in the reflections, tall, impossibly thin. Its exposed muscles glistened wetly in the morning light, and its lidless eyes stared with the fixed intensity of something that had never known sleep. Its lipless mouth spread in what might have been a smile, showing teeth filed 2 points. But when I turned to face where it should be standing, nothing was there, only empty hallway. The figure in the reflections raised one hand, 3 fingers extended, and pressed them against the glass from inside the mirror. Then the reflections went dark, showing only our own terrified faces, staring back at us. Poirot stood perfectly still, his magnificent mustache trembling with some emotion I couldn't name. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, the sound of certainty cracking under the weight of impossible evidence. The game changes, he said. Someone has elevated theatrics to art, and unless Poirot can determine how these illusions are achieved, I fear we shall all become victims of our own terror. Outside, the sun disappeared behind sudden clouds. The temperature dropped, and from somewhere in the depths of the house came Mrs. Barrow's laughter, high and terrible and disturbingly close to madness. Chapter 5. The Ritual Revealed. Bellamy sedated Bernard with morphine, wrapping his ruined hands in layers of bandages that quickly soaked through with clear fluid. The librarian drifted into unconsciousness, his lips still moving in silent recitation of words none of us understood. We gathered in the study while fog pressed against the windows like something trying to force entry. The book. Poirot held the volume at arm's length, examining it without touching the pages. Someone placed caustic chemicals on the cover. When Bernard grasped it, the compound transferred to his palms. Aclevetab ne se pas, one that suggests our murderer knew Bernard would search for this text. How could anyone know that? Gregory paced the room, his nervous energy filling the space. Bernard's research was private. Only Bellamy knew about his interest in the legend. And Mrs. Barrow. Clara sat by the fire, her marked wrist cradled against her chest. She oversees this household, hears everything, sees everything. She could have learned of Bernard's plans and prepared accordingly. You accuse my housekeeper of elaborate murder? Bellamy's voice carried equal parts anger and doubt. Mrs. Barrow has served my family for 30 years. She's eccentric, yes, superstitious, but a killer? Impossible, is it? Zara Petulenko stood by the window, her reflection in the glass showing only empty room behind her, a trick of angle and light surely, yet unsettling nonetheless. Mrs. Barrow's great-grandfather helped burn Whodunit alive. That blood guilt runs deep. Perhaps she seeks to atone through murder, kill the other descendants, make them pay for ancestral sins, and earn forgiveness through their suffering. That's backwards logic. Gregory stopped pacing. If she's atoning, why would she mark herself as a victim? Why include herself in the 7? To avert suspicion, Poirot set down the book with meticulous care, using a cloth to handle it. Or perhaps because she truly believes in the curse. One can orchestrate murders while simultaneously believing supernatural forces guide one's hand. The human mind, it is capable of remarkable compartmentalization. Then arrest her. Clara's voice shook with suppressed fury. If you believe Mrs. Barrow is behind this, remove her from the house before someone else dies. On what evidence? Footprints that prove nothing. Mirror tricks that could be accomplished by any competent stage magician. Poirot's green eyes blazed with frustration. No, we must understand the complete mechanism, the how and the why. Only then can we prevent further deaths. A knock interrupted us. Mrs. Barrow entered without waiting for invitation, carrying a tea tray. Her movements were precise, mechanical, and her pale eye showed that same disturbing satisfaction I'd noticed the previous evening. Tea for the condemned. She set down the tray with deliberate care. Though I wonder why you bother with such niceties. In 3 days Halloween arrives, the 7 will be complete. The Skinless will feast, 3 days? Bellamy's voice cracked. You said 16 days yesterday. The timeline keeps changing. Time moves differently when death approaches. Mrs. Barrow's smile showed too many teeth. The feast accelerates or delays according to the creature's hunger. And it grows hungry, Doctor, so very hungry. Can't you feel it? Watching, studying, learning, which skin will fit best. Get out! Gregory's hand moved toward the poker by the fireplace. Now before you... What? Strike an old woman? Your uncle tried violence once. Mr. Gregory tried to fight what he saw in that mirror. It didn't save him. Nothing will save any of you. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. The girl Annie is asking for you, Monsieur Poirot. Says she has something to show you, something important. I'd hurry if I were you. The marked ones don't have much time. She vanished into the hallway, leaving behind only the scent of lavender and that medicinal odor that seemed to permeate every corner of the house. She knows something. Clara stood, her face pale but determined. She's toying with us, revealing just enough to increase our fear. It's psychological torture. Précisément. Poirot rose, straightening his jacket with precise movements. And psychological torture requires an audience. Come, Hastings. We shall see what Annie Fletcher wishes to reveal. We climbed to Annie's room, where the girl sat by the window, wrapped in blankets, despite the warmth of the fire. Her eyes had lost that glassy quality, replaced by a sharp focus that suggested her earlier madness had been performance-y rather than genuine breakdown. Monsieur? Poirot, her voice came clear and steady, without trace of the terror that had marked her previous speech. I need to show you something. Something I found when I destroyed this room 3 nights ago. You destroyed the room yourself? Poirot moved closer. The symbols, the torn wallpaper, you created that chaos. Mrs. Barrow gave me the paint. Told me the symbols would protect me, that I needed to mark the room before the Skinless could enter. I believed her, did everything she instructed. Annie pulled aside a section of torn wallpaper, revealing the plaster beneath. But when I tore this strip, I found something she didn't expect me to find. Behind the wallpaper, carved into the plaster itself, was a perfect circle. Within that circle, a series of holes had been drilled through the wall at precise intervals. And through those holes, I could see into the adjacent room, a hidden passage I'd never noticed, with clear views into Annie's chamber from multiple angles. "She's been watching me." Annie's voice shook, but with rage rather than fear. "Every night since I arrived, she's been observing through these holes. And there," she pointed to the mirror above her washstand, "that mirror is new. Mrs. Barrow installed it 4 days ago, said the old one had cracked, but this one is different. The reflection doesn't align quite right. And at night, when the lamp is lit just so, I can see through it into another space behind the glass." Poirot examined the mirror with renewed interest. His fingers traced the frame, finding a nearly invisible seam. With careful pressure, a section of the mirror swung inward. Not glass at all, but a cunningly painted panel that concealed a narrow space behind it. Within that space, a figure could stand unseen, appearing to anyone looking at the mirror as though the reflection had come to life. Pepper's ghost. Poirot's voice carried grim satisfaction. A Victorian theatrical technique using angled glass and concealed lighting. But this is more sophisticated. Someone installed this mechanism days ago, before the true terror began. Someone who planned every detail with remarkable precision. Mrs. Barrow. Annie's hands clenched into fists. She created all of it. The footprints, the mirrors, the symbols. She's been staging this supernatural horror to drive us mad. But why? What does she gain from our terror? That, mademoiselle, is the question Poirot must answer. He closed the hidden panel with a soft click. But I begin to understand the shape of this puzzle. Someone seeks not merely to kill, but to orchestrate specific deaths under specific circumstances. Someone who needs the victims to die, believing in the curse, consumed by their own fear. A scream tore through the house. Not human this time, but animal, a dog shrieking with the sound of flesh being torn from bone. The noise came from outside, from the moors beyond the garden. We raced to the window. In the gray afternoon light, I saw what remained of one of Bellamy's hunting dogs. It lay in the garden, its body intact, but its skin, its entire hide, removed with surgical precision. The exposed muscle gleamed wetly in the fog, and the animal's eyes stared upward in an expression of incomprehensible agony. Standing over the corpse was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its own muscles visible through absent skin, its lidless eyes fixed on our window. Then it raised one hand, 3 fingers extended, and drew them across its own throat in a gesture of unmistakable promise. The fog swirled, and when it cleared, the figure had vanished. Only the dog remained, a message written in blood and terror. Poirot stood frozen at the window, his face drained of color. For the first time since I'd known him, the great detective looked genuinely shaken, not by belief in the supernatural, but by the realization that he faced an adversary whose commitment to horror exceeded anything he'd encountered. 3 days, he whispered. We have 3 days to unmask this killer. 3 days before Halloween. 3 days before the final act of this grotesque performance. He turned from the window, and I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than any skinless phantom. Doubt. Chapter 6. The Confession. 2 days passed in mounting tension. Bernard Finch lay sedated in the guest room, his bandaged hands weeping through layers of gauze. Annie Fletcher refused to leave her chamber, though she'd covered the mirror with a bedsheet and blocked the spy holes with wadded paper. Gregory and Clara maintained an armed truce, both sleeping with locked doors and chairs wedged beneath the handles, and Mrs. Barrow moved through the house like a ghost, her pale eyes watching everything, her thin smile suggesting she knew secrets that would destroy us all. Poirot spent those days examining every corner of Bellamy's house. He found more spy holes, more hidden passages, more evidence of elaborate preparation. Someone had spent weeks, perhaps months, transforming the residence into a stage for supernatural theater. The carved wooden stamps that created false footprints, the caustic compound stored in the servants' pantry, the system of mirrors and angled glass that allowed figures to appear and vanish like phantoms. Every trick has been documented. Poirot stood in the study on the evening of October 17th, surrounded by notes and diagrams. The how is clear, but the why, this continues to elude Poirot. Mrs. Barrow has created elaborate horror, marked herself as victim, orchestrated deaths through terror and chemical burns. Yet what does she gain? Revenge against descendants of the mob? If so, why include herself? Perhaps she's mad. Bellamy poured whiskey with shaking hands. Perhaps there's no logic to find. There is always logic. But Poirot's voice lacked its usual certainty. Even madness follows patterns. Even Revengeabe's rules. But this feels like something more. Like a ritual that requires specific conditions, specific victims. Specific. A crash from the hallway silenced him. Running footsteps. Then Mrs. Barrow's voice, high and terrible. It's time! The feast is upon us. All the marked ones must gather. We rushed to find her standing at the base of the stairs, her black dress now smeared with something dark. Blood? Paint? In her hand she held a knife. Not threatening, but offering it handle first to anyone who would take it. Halloween has come early. Her eyes blazed with fever-bright intensity. The creature grows impatient. It appears in mirrors, in windows, in every reflection. Can't you see it? Standing behind you, always behind you, waiting to wear your skin like a coat. Mrs. Barrow. Poirot's voice cut through her hysteria with surgical precision. You have orchestrated this terror from the beginning. The mirrors, the footprints, the chemicals on the book, all you're doing. But the performance is finished. Confess, and perhaps we can still save lives. Save lives? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think I want to save lives? You think any of this is about salvation? She thrust the knife toward Bellamy. My great-grandfather helped burn Vadam alive, watched her scream as the flames consumed her, and he celebrated. Praised God for purging evil from the village. But evil doesn't die, Monsieur Poirot. It transforms, it waits, and it demands payment. You created the skinless, toe-punished descendants of the mob. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Used folklore and chemistry to make us believe in curses, but you're as marked as the rest of us. You'll die with us if this continues. Will I? Mrs. Barrow's smile widened. Or perhaps I'm already dead. Perhaps I died the night. Lionel Garwood looked into that mirror and saw his own skinned face staring back. Perhaps the thing wearing my body now is something else entirely. She drew the knife across her own palm, a quick, deep cut that should have bled profusely. Instead, only a thin line of clear fluid seeped from the wound. She held up her hand, showing skin that moved wrong, that seemed too loose on the muscle beneath. The marks aren't from being chosen, she whispered. They're from the unbinding beginning. The ritual Bernard found describes the process. 7 victims, 7 skins, but not taken, given, offered freely by those who carry blood guilt. And when all 7 skins are shed, Vadoma can return, can wear flesh again, can walk in the world of the living. You believe you're helping Vadoma? Poirot's voice carried equal parts horror and fascination. You think murdering innocents will resurrect the dead? They're not innocent. Their ancestors committed murder. Mrs. Barrow's control shattered. Gregory's great-grandfather brought the kindling. Clara's great-great-aunt wove the binding ropes. Bernard's family provided the wood for the pyre, and his grandmother watched and did nothing. Bellamy's people stood in judgment. And mine built the platform where she burned. And Lionel Garwood. Poirot asked quietly. His family lit the fire. Mrs. Barrow's voice dropped to a whisper. He was first because his blood guilt ran deepest. I gave him the mirror, told him what to do, knew his weak heart would fail when he saw his reflection transformed. And it did. His terror killed him, and his skin became the first offering. His skin? I couldn't stop myself from asking. What do you mean? His skin became, in the cemetery, Mrs. Barrow gestured toward the moors, buried at the base of the standing stones, ritually removed and prepared according to the text. The book Bernard found, I planted it there, coated with compounds that would begin his transformation. Each victim's skin must be harvested and buried before the next can be chosen. 7 skins, 7 graves, 7 souls, to pay for one soul taken unjustly. Bellamy lunged for her, but she moved with surprising speed, dancing backward toward the kitchen. Poirot held up one hand, stopping our pursuit. Let her go. She has confessed. We have witnesses, and without her continued orchestration of terror, the remaining victims are safe. He turned to face us all, his expression grim. Mrs. Barrow is a murderer and a madwoman, but she is human, not supernatural, not cursed, simply broken by guilt and obsession. Then why do I still see it? Annie's voice came from the top of the stairs. In every mirror, every window, every reflection, the Skinless stands behind me, getting closer each night. If Mrs. Barrow created illusions, why do they continue even when she's not present? Before Poirot could answer, the lights died throughout the house. Darkness crashed down like a physical weight. In that blackness, I heard breathing, wet, labored, coming from multiple directions at once. The smell of rotting meat filled the air, mixed with that chemical medicinal odor. Then light returned. Not electric, but something else. A pale phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, casting everything in a sickly green glow. And in that terrible light, I saw what stood in the hallway. Not Mrs. Barrow, something wearing her dress, her shape, but with skin that hung loose like an oversized coat. The thing's face had begun to slough away in strips, revealing the glistening muscle beneath. Its eyes, lidless, unblinking, fixed one each of us in turn, as though measuring which skin would fit best. It raised both hands, showing palms marked with those 3 parallel lines. Then it spoke, in Mrs. Barrow's voice, but wrong somehow, distorted and layered with other voices beneath. Dozens of voices, perhaps hundreds, all speaking in unison. 7 skins for 7 sins. The harvest is complete, and Whodunit comes home. The thing that had been Mrs. Barrow smiled, its lipless mouth spreading wide to show teeth filed to points. Then it stepped forward, reaching for the nearest marked victim with fingers that left frost wherever they touched. Poirot's face had gone white as chalk. For the first time in all our adventures together, the great detective looked at something he couldn't explain, couldn't rationalize, couldn't reduce to human mechanics and simple trickery. And in that moment, I realized we had been investigating the wrong mystery all along. Epilogue. The truth beneath the skin. I fired. The revolver's report shattered the phosphorescent silence. The thing wearing Mrs. Barrow's shape staggered backward, clutching its chest. Not blood, but more of that clear fluid seeped through its fingers. It looked down at the wound with an expression of what might have been surprise, then collapsed against the wall. The lights returned. Normal electric illumination flooded the hallway, banishing the sickly green glow. and in that harsh, revealing light I saw what lay crumpled against the wall. Mrs. Enid Barrow, human, mortal, dying. Her skin hung loose because she had applied the same caustic compounds to herself that she'd used on Bernard's book, a final theatrical gesture to complete her performance. The phosphorescence came from chemicals she'd painted on the walls during her confession, time to activate when the lights failed. The breathing sounds, the smell of rot, recordings played through speaking tubes hidden in the walls, activated by switches she'd concealed throughout the house. Every element explained, every mystery solved, every supernatural horror reduced to stagecraft and chemistry. Poirot knelt beside her, his face a mask of sorrow rather than triumph. Why? His voice came soft, almost gentle. You had confessed. The game was finished. Why continue the performance unto death? Mrs. Barrow's lips moved, blood flecking them now. Real blood, human blood, because the bullet had torn through her lung. When she spoke, her voice carried no trace of the multiple tones, no supernatural resonance, just a dying woman's whisper. Because they had to believe. Had to die believing in the curse. Only then would their deaths have meaning. Garwood died thinking the Skinless had come for him. Bernard will die believing he was marked. The others will spend their remaining days covered in terror. That's the real revenge, Monsieur Poirot. Not death in itself, but the certainty that death comes from supernatural judgment. They carry guilt, and now they carry doom. You never intended to resurrect Whodunit. Poirot's eyes narrowed. That was another lie, another layer of misdirection. Whodunit is dead. Has been for 50 years. Nothing brings back the burned. A terrible smile crossed her face. But her great-granddaughter, Zara Petulenko, she will inherit everything, the fear, the legend renewed, and the 7 estates I've insured. Each marked victim names her as beneficiary. Blood money for blood spilled. That's justice. So all of this, the mirrors, the book, the elaborate horror, was to orchestrate inheritances? Bellamy's voice shook with fury. To ensure Zara Petulenko benefited from our terror? She knew nothing. Mrs. Barrow's voice faded. I did this for atonement. My great-grandfather's sin paid for with the suffering of other sinners. And when you all die, believing in curses, Zara will have wealth enough to honor Whodunit's memory properly. The 7 victims were never meant to be killed. Poirot stood, his face carved from stone. Only Garwood died. The others were marked, terrorized, made to live in fear. But you intended them to survive, to carry that fear forever, and to eventually die natural deaths. Having already signed over their estates to Zara. Yes. Mrs. Barrow's eyes began to glaze. The real curse is living with guilt, living with certainty that something watches. Something waits. Something comes. That's more terrible than death. That's true punishment. Her breath rattled out. Her body went still. And Enid Barrow died as she had lived, orchestrating horror until her final moment. Scotland Yard arrived the next morning. They found the recordings, the chemicals, the carved stamps, the concealed passages. They excavated the cemetery and discovered no buried skin, no ritual harvest, only Mrs. Barrow's elaborate staging. Even Garwood's body, when exhumed, showed no signs of flaying. His skin remained intact. His death had been simple heart failure brought on by terror, exactly as Bellamy had diagnosed. The mirror in Garwood's study showed traces of chemical compounds that could create hallucinations when combined with specific lighting. The pieces of glass Zara had carried were coated in mild psychotropic agents. Touching them would have induced paranoia and visual distortions. Every element of supernatural horror had a rational explanation. Bernard Finch recovered, though his scarred hands would never fully heal. The chemical burns had been severe but treatable. Annie Fletcher left the village the day after Mrs. Barrow's death, refusing to speak of her experience beyond confirming she'd been manipulated into creating the destroyed room herself. Gregory and Clara inherited their respective estates and immediately sold them, neither willing to remain in Ashford Hollow. Bellamy published a monograph on mass hysteria and the power of folklore to shape perception. Zara Petulenko vanished. Some said she'd returned to her caravan on the moors. Others claimed she'd left England entirely, unwilling to accept money stained with her great-grandmother's tragedy. The truth remained as elusive as the woman herself. We departed Ashford Hollow 3 days after Mrs. Barrow's death, as November's gray cold settled over the moors. Poirot sat silent throughout the journey to London, his magnificent mustache drooping slightly, a sign of deep thought or deeper disturbance. You solved it. I broke the silence as our train pulled into Paddington Station, explained every element, proved the supernatural was merely theatrical. But his voice held no satisfaction. Poirot explained the mechanisms, documented the tricks, revealed the murderer's methods and motives. Then why do you look as though the case remains unsolved? He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not doubt, but a profound unease that sat ill with his usual certainty. Because there are elements that resist explanation. Hastings, small details that do not align. He pulled a photograph from his pocket, an image Scotland Yard had taken of Garwood's locked study. Observe. The symbols carved into the floor beneath where Garwood died. Mrs. Barrow could not have carved them. The room was locked from within, and Garwood had no tools. Perhaps he carved them himself in his madness. With what implement? None was found. And these symbols, I have consulted experts in Romani folklore. They do not match any known death hex. They are older, much older, predating the Romana presence in England by centuries. He tucked the photograph away, his face troubled. And there is something else. The dog in the garden, the one we saw, skinned with surgical precision. Scotland Yard examined it thoroughly. The hide was removed with such perfect technique that no human surgeon could have achieved it. Every blood vessel separated cleanly, every layer of tissue divided without tearing, as though the skin simply unbound. What are you suggesting? Poirot suggests nothing. Poirot states only facts. He gazed out the window at London's gaslit streets, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Mrs. Barrow orchestrated elaborate theater. This is proven. But perhaps, just perhaps, her theater was built around something real. Perhaps she found something ancient in those standing stones, something that predated human understanding, and used it as the foundation for her revenge? That's impossible. Précisément. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And yet the impossible occurred. A locked room with unexplained carvings, a dog flayed with inhuman precision, and 7 people who will carry marks on their wrists until they die. Marks that appeared spontaneously, without human agency, perfectly spaced according to anatomical measurements no one should know. He rose as the train came to a complete stop, gathering his hat and coat with meticulous care. The case is closed, Hastings. The murderer is dead. Justice, such as it is, has been served. But some mysteries are solved without being answered, and some truths are more terrible than any fiction. We stepped onto the platform, back into London's familiar chaos. But as I glanced back at the train that had carried us from Somerset, I saw something that stopped my heart. In the window of our empty compartment, a reflection that couldn't exist. A tall, impossibly thin figure with exposed muscle gleaming wetly in the gaslight, its lidless eyes met mine for one eternal moment. Then the train pulled away, carrying the image into darkness and fog. I never told Poirot what I'd seen. Some things are better left unspoken. Some horrors are better faced alone, and some truths about the world's darkness are best kept buried in the ancient earth of Somerset, where fog never fully lifts, and old legends refuse to die. But on certain October nights, when the wind howls and the mist creeps through London streets, I wake convinced I hear wet footsteps outside my window. And when I look into mirrors, I sometimes see, just for a moment, just at the corner of my vision, a figure standing behind me, studying, measuring, waiting. I've told no one about these moments. Not even Poirot. He would dismiss them as psychological after-effects of trauma, and perhaps he would be right. The rational mind knows Mrs. Barrow created every horror through stagecraft and chemistry. But some curses, I've learned, cannot be reasoned away. Some darkness cannot be illuminated by even the brightest little gray cells. And some skin, once marked, can never be unmarked. The feast of the skinless continues, and I suspect it will continue long after the last of us, who witnessed Mrs. Barrow's theater, have turned to dust and memory, because some things are older than human understanding. Some hungers cannot be satisfied, and some legends are legends because the truth is too terrible to name. Thank you for listening to The Feast of the Skinless. Here on Cafe Tales, Poirot reminds us that not every monster hides in shadows. Sometimes it wears a familiar face in the light of day. If you enjoyed this Halloween mystery, please subscribe for more detective tales and share it with fellow lovers of intrigue. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and may your evenings always be filled with good stories and warm company. This is Ailey signing off from Cafe Tales.